Good morning or good afternoon, depending on which region of the globe you're from today. We got a special guest. We've done over 300 videos, my co-host Meg and I, over the last 3+ years, and we've got a special guest joining today out of the UK. We've had probably less than 2% of our total videos for somebody outside of the US, and not because it's not an important region. I think as Meg and I were talking previously, much of our network is focused in the US. Each week we do a special guest. This week we have Bev, who will give a proper introduction in a moment, coming from the UK. In the upper corner of today's broadcast, you'll see a QR code. That QR code will bring you to those videos. You can like and subscribe. If you get value from this or share with a friend, they will bring you to the best practice topics around go-to-market strategies, including account-based. And today, with our special guest, Bev, joining us, she's got a unique perspective. She just wrote a book. If you haven't already seen it on Amazon, we're going to drop a link here shortly. We're going to be talking a lot about the book. And with that, let me turn it over to Meg, my co-host.
Yeah, great. Thanks, John. And Bev, thank you so much for joining us today. I know you've had a whirlwind last month or so with the launch of your now 6th book on account-based, I think making you probably the most prolific author on the topic, unless I'm mistaken. But also, I think there's an amazing amount of great information in this book, and I'm excited for you to share it with us and to tell us a little bit about kind of how, what you've learned about account-based over the process of all of these books, really, and the client work that you do. But also to learn a little bit about some of the new things that have emerged since your 5th book, and some of the things that you're seeing in the market. But I'd love to open our conversation with something that really struck me. I had the pleasure of joining Bev for her book launch, hosted by Salesforce in London a couple of weeks back. And what really stood out to me was the warmth and camaraderie of the community that showed up at that event. I mean, first of all, it was a very big group for a commitment of time on a busy day. And they all really wanted to be there and show up and learn and talk with each other, and really celebrate the new book. A community like that doesn't happen by accident. And in fact, in some ways, it almost felt like it's starting to sustain itself. Bev, maybe you can open up by telling us a little bit about the community around ABM that you've built, and some impressions of how it's kind of evolving and growing.
Oh, Meg, I love that observation. I mean, first of all, thank you for inviting me to be here with you. But I think that's it. It's not really, this book even is not really just me. There's 24 guests plus a foreword by Philip Kotler. There's a lot of people represented in the book. And I love the way ABMers share. They will share their pains, they will share their ideas, what they've tried, what's failed, what's worked for them. And you mentioned the event in London, and we were lucky enough to have some people come and tell their story at that event. And I just loved how honest they were and how they dealt with the questions from the floor. I think 150 people were invited. And that, as you say, for an afternoon event, that's a big time commitment but they really get value out of talking to each other. And I just think that's really special. And that happens all over the world.
Yeah, it was clear this was a group of people who really wanted to be there. And as you say, I was struck by the directness and honesty of people in terms of the things that worked on their journeys, the things that didn't. But I think, too, there's something to be said for just the pure size and scale of people doing account-based around the world. And I think you've got sort of a bird's eye view of that. How have you seen that community grow and change?
Yeah, well, I mean, back in 2003, I could name 2 people that were doing it when we first started doing research on it. Today, there are 250,000 people on LinkedIn with ABM in their job title. I mean, it blows my mind every time I say that number. So that's a minimum of people around the world doing ABM. And what I've seen over that time, as ABM's proved that it works better than other B2B marketing approaches, I've seen people change the focus of their field marketing teams to be more account-based. And I think that's what that big number reflects. More and more people are being asked to do account-based marketing. Not all, often on top of their other day job. So, but there's certainly more and more people asking for help in terms of how do I get started? How does it work? Where can I go for resources? So that's one of the reasons I wanted to write this new book.
Yeah, this book is phenomenal, and I put the link. Actually, let me bring the link back up here in the in this description here, and this is what it looks like for those who are looking for it on Amazon. But I'm curious, Bev, you've seen since the day of dawn of ABM and kind of the growth and evolution. If you were comparing and contrasting regions, that of say Europe, outside of Europe, Europe versus US, or Europe versus the rest of the world, what are you seeing in terms of differences with ABM, be it the types of adoption or the types of ABM, or maybe there's a lot of similarities? Where do you see the similarities and differences?
It's a great question, John. And I think ABM started and it popped up because of it within big global complex companies like Accenture and so on. It popped up in different regions at the same time, and it was very much one-to-one at that point. You know, what we're calling strategic ABM. But since then, North America has just gone to the scale end of ABM, and I get that, because such an enormous market. It's the homogeneity of the market. You all speak the same language. If you're trying to penetrate the retail sector, it's hundreds of thousands of companies. So I think the scale makes sense, and is enabled by the tech that much of which has come out of the US as well. I think in Europe there's still a weighting towards one-to-one. And people are trying to adopt the more scaled approach, but there's even legal issues around being able to do that. So if you take Germany, it's not just a preference for maybe switching off some of these cookies and things. It's much harder to do tech-enabled programmatic in some countries, and I point to that one as an example. And then when you get to APAC, the thing I've observed is the one-to-few model plays quite well there, because you often don't have a lot of resource in individual countries across APAC. And so people are buddying up and doing industry-based kind of segment ABM. So there are differences around the world, but I think it started the same way and has grown differently in different regions.
No, which I think makes sense. It's just you evolve to meet the needs of your market, and I think that's very much what's played out. But speaking of that, one of the things that you bring out in the book is 2 new types of account-based that I think we can sort of say intuitively many of us who've been in marketing for a while have seen, but I appreciate the way that you've given them a name and a focus and some really good examples. Maybe share with us those 2 new types and tell us a little bit about how they work and why they work.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is one of the exciting things in the new book. So we've all grown up with what most people call one-to-one, one-to-few, one-to-many. For me, that is strategic, segment, and programmatic. What's happened at the top end, for people that perhaps they need to scale that kind of one-to-one intense approach a bit beyond the traditional, span of 3 accounts or something. They found a way of doing it, which is about being really clear what business outcome you're trying to drive in an account. Because a full strategic ABM plan, it may be for a global account, you may be doing all sorts of things across different business units. With scenario, as the name would suggest, you're saying to the account director, what's the most important scenario we can help you with now? Is it about breaking into that business unit? Or is it about building the confidence that we know what we're talking about in this particular area? Or is it about making sure people get value from what they've just bought from us? So just pick one and we'll work on that for now. And the beauty of that is you tend to spot similar scenarios occurring again and again across a group of account executives. And so you pick those ones because those are the most challenging things for your business. And then you build a kind of playbook of what works in that scenario. And it's a great way of standardizing an approach in the background, I guess, but actually making it feel really one-to-one for each account. So that has been adopted in professional services, in software, in outsourcing, and I think it's the scale and the pace of adoption around that is huge. So I think that's really exciting. The other one is pursuit marketing. And this is one, Meg, I mean, and John, you will have done this over the years, helped out on big deals or pursuits or whatever you call them. But I think what I'm seeing now is there's a renewed interest in building a kind of professionalism around it. So it may be that there's a separate team set up, or there's it's part of the remit of the ABM team. But ABMers are getting more involved in supporting deals. And what I love about that is we know that from companies like Accenture, when you're applying ABM and you're treating your top customers really well year after year after year, you actually avoid the RFP process. You know them so well that you're developing solutions with them. And that, of course, means you're a better partner. It means that you're on speed dial when they need something and you're building the solution with them. And even if something does go to RFP, you've effectively written the RFP, so you're more likely to win. So I think there's a really nice synergy between ABM and pursuit marketing, and that's why I've sort of brought it into the fold, if you like, as the fifth new one. Does that make sense?
Yeah, the different flavors. I'm glad you brought that up, and I was just thinking about the pursuit and scenario, and we hear a lot in the U.S. do less with more, or do more with less. I got that backward. Like, there's a real crunch right now on budget. How do you think, and I think you reference it in the book too, about benchmarks, how should we think about benchmarking, or what's the normalization of a scenario versus, say, a pursuit, or what's the best way to frame that up from a budget perspective or investment perspective?
Yeah, that's a great question, John. And I think we did do some research last year, which made it into the book, because people are always asking, well, how much should I budget for this? And I should say the sample that we researched is very mature, very large companies doing ABM. So this won't apply if you're in a smaller company and an earlier in your journey kind of as a business. But so strategic ABM one-to-one, we found that people are spending about $38,000 per account per year. But the range is from $10,000 to $93,000. So it really depends what type of business you're in, and how many accounts you're covering, what your deal size is, that kind of stuff. That drops for scenario to 28,000. Again, range from 2 to 75. So the whole range drops. So you're investing less in a scenario-based approach, which is why I think it's increasingly popular in this do more with less time, as you said, John. Cluster or segment ABM, you're looking at about £95,000 per segment per year, but you have around 10 accounts in each segment. So it's less than $10,000 per account. And the range there is 1,000 to 600,000. Depending on what you're trying to do and how big your segments are. Then you come to programmatic, and this is why programmatic is so strong in North America, where you've got to cover so many accounts. It's 36,000 per group of 500 accounts. It's about $72 per account per year. So why wouldn't you do that once you've got the tech infrastructure? And then pursuit, the last one, actually is the biggest. So our benchmark came out at $50,000 per deal, but the range is $1,000 to $348,000. But of course, the deal size can be up to 500 million or above if you're a big company. So it's all about working out what your deal size is, what your annual revenues are, and thinking about what works for you. But that's the kind of relative investment across the types.
It's also a big reminder that when looking at benchmarks, averages do not tell the story.
Absolutely. You've got, and I always think this is true about ABM. You can't, one size does not fit all. You've got to make it work in your business context, with your type of customer profile and your deal profiles and everything. You have to understand that. So if anyone rocks up and just says, yeah, we can help you with ABM and we do it the same everywhere, the warning bell should go off, because you can see just from that data, there's such a range.
Well, and just that customers are different too. So I think, but thinking about that and thinking about the different types of ABM, the amounts of money involved in some cases too are quite significant. What are some of the things you've seen emerge as the skills that leaders of ABM programs need? It strikes me as different than the early days of ABM now. Any thoughts on that?
I think commercial acumen, understanding this stuff is really important. Understanding how your business makes money, how big your deal sizes are, how many accounts actually drive the majority of your revenue. I mean, the book before this one was on account-based growth, and I think I've bored everybody silly with the 80-20 rule and the fact that it's fractal, so it repeats itself. But what it means is 1% of your accounts, if you're an established business, can be driving half your revenue. And I think that people in marketing don't think that way, and we've never treated marketing as something that should be invested in 1% of customers. You know, we're coming from a broadcast world, you know, back in the 50s and so on. So I think that is something that program leaders need to understand. What is the customer portfolio that they're dealing with, and who is more important than the others, you know? I like to think of it as a frequent flyer program. So what are the benefits you're going to give that top 1% that you aren't perhaps going to give your big tier of customers who perhaps get programmatic or something, you know? So that's one. I think collaboration is really important. And again, in the book, we did some research on the skills people have, and collaboration comes out top. I think marketers are collaborative, aren't they? And ABMers seem to be even more so, because they're trying to tie down the whole team to deliver a great experience for the customer. So they're being customer centric, but they're also trying to orchestrate their whole organization. So those two skills, I think, are increasingly recognized as being important for ABMers and program leaders. The other one's AI, of course, but we can't have a session and not talk about AI, can we?
Well, we should dive into that. And I love how you're talking about speak the language of the business. And, you know, that's something that we've been echoing here too in the US is it's so easy to get caught up in our own language of marketing, and especially with the technology. Sometimes that gets lost on the non-marketing audience. So the more you understand the business, I wholeheartedly agree with what you're saying there. But going to your AI point, that third skill that you mentioned, and I kind of see Europe as the leader right now and kind of setting the tone of a framework or guidelines with AI. You know, I think we're kind of like the wild, wild west right now in the US, where we don't have that guideline and approach or that rigor. That's my perspective. What's your perspective? What are you seeing with AI as it relates to ABM in Europe and then outside of Europe?
Yeah, and I think, John, that you make such a good point, because the EU AI Act, I think, was the first inked, and I think it will inevitably influence other regions' approach, and it tiers the risks. So, you know, the top tier where something could be, you know, deep fake, it could be manipulative. You just got to avoid that. I mean, ethically, we should not be doing anything in that area. But most of the things that ABMers do don't fall into that. So, I mean, that's the first thing to say. But I do think everyone should be aware of what the ethical issues are, and how they are handling data and how they're respecting the people they're communicating with, and being transparent that they're using AI to communicate with them. So that's the other sort of slightly uncertain thing. How are we going to be doing this? What I'm seeing is there are some companies who are way ahead on this, and ABM teams inside who are, you know, generating messaging, they're generating visual identities, they're generating videos, you know, graphical pieces, they're summarizing meetings, you know, they're using it across creative and productive kind of angles. And then you get others whose company policy means that they can't access most of these tools, and there is some nervousness that they're getting left behind, not just competitively in their company, but as individuals practicing. So I think, I mean, Jaspreet Bindra, who is a colleague of mine and is in chapter 11 of the book, looking at what's ahead, he always reassures people and says, don't worry, AI is not going to take your job, but somebody using it might do. if you're not. So I think that's a really important message. Everyone should be experimenting and seeing how they can cut their own time, be more productive, be more creative with the tools out there. And the other thing that really struck me, actually, someone said, and it was Joe Moss at Salesforce, who said at the end of the book launch event in London, we are the last team of leaders who will lead a human-only workforce. And of course, Salesforce very heavily into the agentic AI piece now. And that really sat with me. So I have my own little team. They're called Claude and Perplexity and ChatGPT. And I go to different members of the team when I need help on different things. And it's just a daily thing now. But not everybody is there. And I think we need to make sure, or people need to make sure, that they are personally educating themselves in how to do this and how to work with AI tools. It's a long answer, John, sorry.
I agree with you. I've got my little team too. I think it's that's the only way you're going to get from point A to point B. And I agree with you on the some of the companies are just really, really slow to adopt. I have used my own daughter's company. She's part of a global company, very large organization, and thou shalt not use AI because they're so concerned about data and privacy, which probably in Europe too, in certain countries you see that. But it just really struck me, like how are you ever going to improve if you don't ever use the tools? So having it on your own and having your personal team is probably not a bad strategy if you can afford to get away with it.
Yeah, and I mean, there's all sorts of things you can do, like anonymizing data before you use a tool to make sure you're not compromising it. And also some tools they have different privacy settings. They have, you're able to say, do not use my data and our interactions to train your model. Whereas other tools are just snaffling up everything to continually train their model. So knowing the difference between those things and looking out for it and making sure your settings correct. I'm not an expert, but that's the sort of thing that I've been told to do and have been trying to do.
Well, thinking about sort of the flip side of AI is within ABM, there's still a great need, as you mentioned earlier, for collaboration and alignment and just good old fashioned, working well with your colleagues. What's some advice you've given marketers, either that you give now or that you've given in the past, in terms of winning over skeptical partners in sales? What are some ways you've seen that work?
Yeah, and in the book, there's a viewpoint from the global CMO at PwC, Antonia Wade. And in my interview with her, she said something so obvious and profound, actually. Really smart lady. She said, start with something that sales have not been able to do on their own. So there's never any quibble about attribution or anything like that, because if they say to you, I've been trying to get a meeting with this person for 2 years, and they just won't take my call, they won't take my meeting, and you manage to get that meeting, then you've proved the point, and it's a very practical way of proving it. So I would go there. I think, it can be easy to shy away from the difficult situations because you're not sure you're going to be successful and you want the low-hanging fruit. But I think if you can take something that's been a challenge that they genuinely need help with, then and make them successful, that's the best way to get buy-in for ABM, I think.
And maybe just extending that advice theme and thinking about, in this environment right now globally, we're all working from different locations, and companies probably have a diverse buying team that may span regions. What advice would you give internally to, say, somebody in Europe working with a US counterpart for maybe an EMEA headquartered company or a US based company? Like what advice internal teams would you give for marketers to work with one another on that collaboration?
Yeah, and this is a huge issue, John, actually. And a lot of the companies that I work with are still trying to figure this out. When we have a multinational client, who takes the lead? Who else is involved? How do we scope that? And I think what I've seen work best is having an ABMer co-located with the account lead in your business. So, if it's BMW and they're in Germany and the account director is in Germany, then the ABM leader should be in Germany for that account as well, I think. And then if they're also, I don't know, in America, and there's a big operation in America, then you need part of someone's time on the ABM team in America to support as well. So it's all about getting on those regular team calls, building that kind of project working group almost, and it will depend what you're running at what time. So there might be a specific deal where there's a group of people handling the pursuit marketing, or there might be a specific scenario that you're working on that doesn't involve America but involves China, or involves Spain, or whatever it might be. So I think it's about getting that, understanding where the co-located lead is, and then mapping out, well, which other countries are involved and how do we make these people feel like a virtual team.
Well, and maybe just to close, Bev, kind of building on sort of skills and resourcing, along with the launch of the book, Inflexion launched the ABM Academy. And one of the things that struck me about the ABM Academy is you've got multiple levels of courses that go all the way up to advanced, sort of expert, even beyond advanced. What are some of the things that, sort of led you to say, people who are experts don't usually seek out training? But in this case, I think we know they are still looking for development within ABM. Any kind of parting thoughts on what ABM experts are looking for?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the expert ABMer who is doing ABM on an account or a segment or whatever, they're always looking for what's working, what tactics are working now, how do I stand out from what everybody else is doing, and they want to be re-energized and inspired, because it can be a tough job. It can be a job that you feel a bit burnt out from if you've had a particularly intensive time, especially if you're doing pursuits. So I think there's that re-energize, keep my skills up to date. If you're a practitioner, expert practitioner, if you're a program leader, which of course is a different, more generalist expert, then you've got all these issues like John was just saying. How do I get my global team to work together for our most important accounts? There's things like that it's more about how do you lead the program, shape the program, and enable the team that you're hoping to do ABM either across the territory or across the world. So I think we wanted to recognize that at that expert level, you've got that bifurcation of I'm an individual specialist or I'm a generalist leading a program. And I think that's really exciting.
Yep, agreed. And we are very lucky that you were able to carve out some time to join us. I know your schedule's been crazy with all sorts of exciting things. So thank you, Bev, very much. John, thoughts as we close, and Bev, thoughts as we close.
I'll toss it to Bev, but here's the book again. I put the link down below so you can get it on Amazon. And this has been great to hear the different perspectives. I think what I'm taking away from this is clear understanding between the different regions and scenario-based ABM versus pursuit-based ABM, the different benchmarking to consider it. And some of the skills that ladder up to both of those ABM approaches. And then just the whole, that was a bit of a sticky question around how do you get global companies to work together? It's a hard, and you're working with the largest enterprises, Bev. So you've seen this kind of at scale, at a very large scale. So it's really interesting to hear your perspective on that. So thank you for involving your Friday afternoon with us. And any closing thoughts on your side?
I think going back to that community, if we can get these big companies working together for the benefit of society, so bringing the whole CSR thing into ABM, I think companies together, some of the scale of these companies is huge. Governments can't do it on their own. We can really make a difference, and that community is core to it. So really exciting times, I think. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. And next week, Meg, do we have a special guest next week? Is it benchmarks that we're doing next week?
We do. We have a little different perspective on benchmark. Bev shared with us some numbers reflecting sort of investment in more mature organizations. Next week, we're going to hear about a range of company sizes in B2B SaaS in particular from Ray Reich of Benchmark. Ray's been on before, but he's just launched a really just chock full of facts and figures benchmark that is also interactive, that people can go in and sort of see where they stand relative to a number of different categories. And one of the things that made me happy is it actually reflects a lot of the numbers that we used to track in the old Tracking the True Cost of Marketing at Serious Decisions. And the other layer that Ray's brought into it is looking at differences in performance. So performance and investment for companies who grow faster versus those who don't. And I think it brings in some really interesting highlights and insights that people can take back as they continue to try to make the most of the budgets they have or argue for more next year in some cases. So excited to have Ray join us next week.
Yeah, that should be great. Like you said, he'll be rejoining us from a couple months ago. I think he joined us. So in this survey, I think John Miller, former founder of Engagio and Marketo, and Carol Liu had also collaborated and pulled together. So really looking forward to going through those results. So again, Bev, thanks for investing the time, and we'll see you same time next week.
Thanks, everybody. Happy Friday.
Bye.
Bye.